5 degrees. Tomorrow will be bright and dry in most areas with sunny spells. And now you're up to date on News Talk.
Off the ball. This is News Talk.
Now you're welcome, Max. So, latest in the Champions League, it's a lively game, 10 minutes gone in Turin. No goals yet, though. Juventus, after a very good first 2 minutes from Manchester United, have since taken control of the game, zipping the ball around in a fashion familiar to that which we saw at Old Trafford. But 0-0 is the latest in Turin. Earlier today, Valencia beat Young Boys 3-1 in that group. Manchester City are at home to Shakhtar, 0-0. We have Lyon at home to Hoffenheim in the same group, 0-0, and Juventus, I've mentioned. What else is of interest? Bayern Munich 0, Athens 0, Benfica and Ajax 0 as well. Okay, and Real Madrid, who we were just talking to Graham about, they're 0 so far against Victoria Pilsen. Right, rugby.
Wednesday night rugby on Off the Ball
with Air Sport. Watch every Munster and Leinster game only on the Air Sport pack. Visit airsport.ie.
We have Ruaidhri O'Connor of the Irish Independent here in studio. Ruaidhri, thanks for coming in as ever. So this Saturday looks like Italy against Georgia at 2 o'clock, Scotland against Fiji at 2:30. England, New Zealand is at 3 o'clock. Wales, Australia is at 5:20. Ireland, Argentina is at 6:30. And then France, South Africa is at 8:05. Liam Toland makes a rare appearance on Wednesday Night Rugby. Evening, Liam.
How are you guys?
I reckon you'll watch about 28 hours of rugby this weekend.
It's one of the glamour end of the business side, Joe, where you sit down and you watch a lot of rugby. Sometimes because you want to. I struggled after about 12 minutes of the Italy game because I felt as a competition it was probably over at that stage. And then it goes straight into analysis. But there's some juicy ones this Saturday. Obviously, England, New Zealand is probably in many ways the pick of it because it could put Eddie Jones in a dark place. Yeah, no doubt. Do you want to give them, we talked, and I think everyone has probably a bit too much at this stage, about Ireland 54, Italy 7. Any headline points you want to make from the game or things which jumped out to you? I suppose they're nearly 6,000 kilometres from home, so you'd question the value of the fixture in itself, but you definitely wouldn't question the fact of giving opportunities like Jay Conan, for example, who I thought had a really big game. The prop situation, I think we all are pretty much in agreement of the starting 15 and indeed the starting 23 in many cases, and we'll probably see that a very strong selection for this weekend. But it was really great to see Carberry. I've had the pleasure of being live at many of these games, and he's certainly growing and growing at each stage. And I think we have to temper our ambition for him in many ways, and particularly when he's in the red jersey of Munster and indeed for Ireland as well, that it could take him another few seasons, but it's still great to see him play and to see all the combinations around him play. Yeah, no doubt. Greg Feek added to the Larmour hype as well. He was saying, I came through the age grades with Christian Cullen, Carlos Spencer, guys like that. It's stating the obvious when you see something like what we saw in Chicago, but the only other person who has footwork like that or can do things like that I can remember would be a Carlos or a Christian Cullen. No pressure, Jordan Larmour.
I did. I asked the question and it was...
Oh, is this your fault?
Yeah, do you think he's like... Does he remind you of a young... You played with Christian Cullen. Does he remind you of a young Christian Cullen?
Okay, so you're leading the witness a bit.
He played underage with him, so like he saw those two coming up as young men.
You not give Jordan Larmour a break now, do you need to be doing this?
Pipe.
Yeah. Larmour, Liam?
Well, you know, let me flip it to the other side. I think Stockdale has really evolved over the last little while, and... like he's a big guy, isn't he? And he's got a very different set of skill sets. But that opening couple of minutes of his performance, when Italy were competitive, is why I put so much store on his performance at that stage. Look, Larmour, we've seen it, and you think back to the Italy game in the Six Nations when he came on. There was an Irish exit out of the Irish 22. And instead of passing it to him, where he would have run definitely 80 metres and scored his first international try, there was a kick out of the 22, and he ended up having to defend it. And we know what happened, and the try was scored. That's the uniqueness of the player, that if you give him the ball in his 22, he could score that try. We saw it against a very weakening Italian side in Chicago. The other parts of his game, and that's why I look at someone like Stockdale, I think of who might be the starting wingers in a test environment, which is obviously this week and next week. And you can't get away from Keith Earls. He's still, for me, the best back three, if you want, available. And I'd be very surprised if Stockdale doesn't make it as well, depending on the permutations of what they want to achieve out of the, you know. So for all the highlights of what Larmour did, and it's glorious to see, I have a sense that Joe Smith puts huge value in stuff like that Stockdale is capable of doing as well.
Okay, interesting. So it seems, by the way, Rob Kearney, if we're talking about that back three, is rated as 50-50, and on a Wednesday being 50-50 is...
He's a lot less than 50-50. I wouldn't expect him to play that at all.
Okay. And what's the word? I mean, Conway's been mentioned, Addison has been mentioned, various names thrown around today.
They both did media yesterday, which was something of a surprise, because if they're, generally if a player does media on a Tuesday, they're probably going to be involved. You could take that almost as a given, which means that one of Larmour, Earls and Stockdale won't be involved if you do the maths. So whether that means Addison coming in at 15, whether it means Conway at 15, Addison on the bench, Conway at 14, Stockdale gets a rest. He does tend to tinker around the edges. Say if he's taking this as a dry run for the first 2 games of the World Cup, which he could very well be, he could be looking at, well, how do I get the best out of my squad for those 2 games in 6 days of that World Cup? It's 2 games in 7 this time. So maybe it's give Stockdale a rest this time and you unleash him on the All Blacks, because he's a very different skill set. You play a ground game, very much a running game with those hard running backs that he's picked. And you flick to Rob Kearney and Stockdale, very much let's go for them in the air against New Zealand. So I think they're like the 2 places where he tends to tinker are the second row and the back 3. So if you look at last year's, remember Adam Byrne started against Argentina in the last game last year, and no one saw that coming. That's where he generally looks for a bit of room for manoeuvre. So it'd be no surprise to see one of those in. I don't know which one yet. The second row is the other one that's probably up for debate a little bit. I think the rest, the other 12, 13 places kind of pick themselves.
Yeah.
I wouldn't expect Kearney to be involved at all.
Team name tomorrow. Jerry Thornley went and did the hard graft, and the Irish Times had it yesterday, I think. Maybe it was today, but either way. Ireland sensed the Argentina match in 2015, Liam, and I guess in some ways that 2015 Argentina game has underpinned so much of the last number of years. Ireland have used 77 players since then. 36 of them have been debutants, and that's in just 32 games, which is quite extraordinary.
It is. It is for a variety of reasons. You got to give credit to an awful lot of people, but obviously the foundation of that is in the provinces in many, many ways. Most of the tinkering, though, tends to happen during the November window series. If you trace back the last 3 or 4 seasons of the 23 men picked for the 6 nations, there's almost no change. There's a huge consistency of selection throughout all the 6 nations. If you pick England and Scotland, it's immaterial. I think this November series is slightly different in the sense that we obviously have 4 games, but the 2 middle games, a bit of what Rory was saying there, are building on towards a springboard into the World Cup. And I think there'd be less room for experimentation, if you like, that traditionally would happen at this stage. But it's great to see so many players. It's great to see, like, if you think of, my old position, open side, the amount of open sides who now get an opportunity to play for Ireland is phenomenal. You're talking 5-6 players. You could argue Rhys Ruddock, he played 1 autumn season at open side. So there's a huge amount of opportunity. If players make the provincial side, there's a very good chance they'll not only win with the provincial side, but they'll get picked for Ireland at some point. And in that environment, they'll also win as well. So it's great for the player, but it's great for us, the punter watching. So
we've a good feel of where Ireland are at the moment. Argentina maybe less so. Rory, I mentioned that 2015 game. How does 43 points to 20, reminder of the scoreline? They've only met once since then, actually. We've gone from a point where it seemed like Argentina never left us alone to just once since then. How does the 2018 version under Ledesma compare? It's evolved. I think there's only 13 of them left, so I would say the numbers... If you were to do the same exercise with Argentina, would be something similar. Yeah. They don't pick. I guess the point is 3 years is a long time in rugby. It really is. It really is. You don't have he's not picking the overseas players, so they've got a different coach. Ledesma has taken over in the last month because Daniel Hurcad, who was the coach that day against Ireland, kind of stayed a little bit too long. Probably results weren't going their way. They've only won 4 games against the real established Tier 1 nations since that World Cup game. They've beaten the likes of Chile, Italy, but really this year they beat Australia away and South Africa at home, I think, in the Rugby Championship. But that was the most they've gotten in all that time. So there's definitely been a sense that they've been changing. They've moved on to kind of the Ireland team that Joe has kind of brought through from the 2016 under-20s that got to the final. Ireland beat Argentina in the semi-final in that tournament. So that was James Ryan, Stockdale and Andrew Porter's team. There's a few of those. Delgui, the winger, who's really tricky, really good player, was playing that day, and he has
Ledesma was the coach of the Jaguares, so that's the Super Rugby team, and he coached them this year, having coached Australia's scrum for the last couple of seasons.
Yeah,
and
just
he got
to
them
give
to the quarterfinal.
The spark notes. I mean, Ledesma, everyone's remember from the 07 World Cup. So since then, if people are wondering, he went in at Stade Francais under Michael Cheika, Montpellier under Fabien Galtier, and then back under Cheika at the Waratahs, Australia, the World Cup in 2015, and then the Jaguares head coach for about a year, and then he's got this
for one season,
top job. Yeah.
But he got them to the quarterfinal, which no Argentinian team, no Jaguares team had ever done before. They were a bit of a joke before then, and probably tightened up their offloading, that they were doing, and got their scrum right. But then he takes over from Hurkacz a year out from the World Cup, really. Gets them 2 wins in difficult circumstances. Should have been 3. They got caught at half time against, they were hammering Australia and then got beaten.
21 points up or something.
Yeah, 24 I think.
Was it? Yeah.
And they could have won in Nelson against New Zealand had they had a scrum. And the big problem they have, which is unbelievable to be talking about an Argentina team, they don't have a scrum. But they have a scrum coach, and it might still be too soon, but I'd say this time, by the time they get to the World Cup, he'll have fixed that.
Yeah.
He's left Herrera at the Stade Francais tight head, who was in the initial wider squad. He hasn't brought him to Dublin, which I think is a big surprise, because he's the kind of guy you can build it around. But he's obviously trying to invest in the younger players, trying to get them to a level. But that day in Nelson, their back three were brilliant. Their centres were good. They made an unbelievable amount of line breaks and stuff against New Zealand. But then New Zealand just turned the screw in the scrum, kicked to the corner and scored tries.
Right.
And that's what Ireland could do to them on Saturday. So they've all sorts of talents. They still have the running game that undid Ireland that time, but they also had a scrum that day. And the big fear for them coming over will probably be their scrum.
Okay, interesting. Liam, do you want to come in on that?
Yeah, if you look at the statistics of the championship and you compare them to Ireland in the Six Nations, obviously one extra game in the championship, but the one place that Argentina came worse in the statistics is the scrum. They were 79% scrums won versus New Zealand at 100%. That's unheard of. But the two areas they're still strong is the metres gained and the defenders beaten. They're second only to New Zealand of those two fronts, so they still provide an enormous threat, which brings the team selection, the Ireland's team selection into play. And certainly if you look at the second rows, I think the front row will pick itself. The second rows then, for me, James Ryan would have to start with the back row. That would obviously be Peter Manny, Sean O'Brien if fit in that, and CJ Stander. So the question then is, who would you pair with Ryan? There's a lot of talk about the line-out. I certainly think that line-up management is the most important part. So who's managing that? It looks like Ryan is capable of doing that, as is Peter O'Mahony, as is other players. Toner, for me, if he was to be picked, and there's a huge argument for him to be picked, it's not because he gets into the air, it's because he might manage the line-out, and he has a huge nuisance factor in the line-out and defending on the deck, and his fringe defence around, his contribution. But from a line-up point of view, Tadhg Byrne, Peter O'Mahony, James Ryan are more than capable and competent of being world-class line-out. So I think the selection doesn't come down to who gets their hands in the air highest, because Peter O'Mahony probably wins that across the face of the world. The selection goes, who can actually be such a nuisance around the breakdown to slow down the recycle to prevent those Argentinian, and their team, 19 of their squad that played against Australia are on the tour. So it's not like they're just picking guys. So they have that ability. So I think one of the key areas is, as Rory pointed, is the scrum. But then when you have Argentina building phases, have you got a second row and a back row capable of stopping them in the gain line, cutting them down, stealing a ball or penalty, or worst case scenario being nuisance? And all of that slows down Argentina's ability to I suppose, to expose us out wide, like what happened in the World Cup. So that's why team selection, particularly second row, is more than just a line-out.
Yeah, no, it's a great point. And remind me, I mean, I certainly remember very well the talk of how exposed Ireland were out wide against Argentina. Was there lots of quick ball in that game? Did Ireland get done at the breakdown?
They got beaten in the collision. That was the one word that Joe Schmidt in the press conference afterwards just kept coming back to: collision. Okay. If you get over the gain line, you win the collision.
Yes.
You get it wide. It was like Rhys Ruddock came on quite early. He hadn't played any rugby. Chris Henry started because Sean O'Brien was out. They got bullied a bit. I think it was Chris Henry, Geordie Murphy and Jamie Heaslip in the back row. So you're taking out two of your biggest hitters, O'Mahony and O'Brien, and it really paid. So then they got the front ball, then got the ball wide. The line speed was poor as a result of the fact that they were on the back foot. One of the big reasons Andy Farrell got brought in, I would presume, that, to fix that kind of line speed element. Yeah. And they just got around the fringes all the time.
Yeah. It was a grim day. Actually, on Ledesma, the coach, I was just reading a piece that quoted O'Gara's autobiography, and he was talking about a win over Argentina in '04, and everybody retired to the Shelburne Hotel, and there were. This was a time where it was really, the relationship was not good, and Rog had been accused of over-celebrating, and Eddie O'Sullivan was making accusations of gouging at the time. This was the atmosphere afterwards. So Rog remembers in the Shelburne Hotel. Ledesma was speaking in Spanish, so I didn't understand what he was saying, but it was clear that he was having a go, and everything about his demeanour was menacing. From where I was standing, it looked like he wanted to kill me, and I wasn't hanging around to test my hunch. O'Gara headed for his room.
I'm just wondering, Joe, has he an autobiography, and has he an account of that?
That's a great... that should be his first...
Accuse O'Gara of the exact same thing. They must be slightly different athletes.
It should be the first question he's asked in his post-match press conference. So, I mean, are you both expecting an Ireland win? I mean, it sounds, Rory, like you're hinting at let's attack them up front and kick for the corners and grind this one out, arm wrestle this one out for the first 50 minutes.
I think it's 2 against 11 in the world, and there's a 17-point spread in the bookies. Now, I think that seems a little bit off. That looks big.
Okay.
But I do think Ireland should win, yeah. But then it's the team who haven't played together for about 6 months. Poor preparation. You know, half the team went to Chicago last week. The other half stayed.
Yeah.
Wasn't
yesterday
the first time? Yeah. The first time they trained together. The players were coming in drips and drabs from Italy. There was lads coming in from South Africa who played for Munster and Leinster. So I don't think it's perfect. I don't think that they'd be happy with that level of preparation. It might mix and match selection a little bit. I'd say they've put a lot into New Zealand in the last 10 days. I think New Zealand is the one this month. And I think Argentina, while are not the team that they were in 2015, are still a very, very good, very game team who could. We saw last year they finished the game strong. They scored a try in the last minute against Ireland, 2 minutes into injury time, and traditionally they're supposed to be tired this time of year. So I think they'll give it a good rattle, and it'll be tighter than the bookies are giving it at the moment. But I do think that Ireland have the tools. They're, all the fundamentals of their game are so good. Yeah. They will score. But Argentina will make life difficult for them. I think it'll be tighter than people probably give credit for. It's a very strange build-up. It's a low-key build-up this week.
Yeah,
usually you've kind of teams flying around this time of the day. It's not really, there's not that much talk of it.
Yeah.
So whether that seeps into camp or not, probably not. Joe Schmidt kind of usually keeps that sort of stuff out.
Yeah, you suspect actually, Liam, when you look at it, next week will be the only week of full proper build-up to a full proper test. So there is that slight question mark over preparations this week. But 17 points, something like that, sound about right?
I think it's a little generous. For me, I think we've touched on the scrum advantage that Ireland should have. But the real disadvantage, you look at the Argentinian legend, the hooker Creevy, and I remember the last time Argentina came to Dublin, I spent the morning counting up the air miles he covered as for his provincial side in Argentina, and then playing for Argentina, and it was just, he did like 6 laps the world in a season, and he still is capable of turning up and performing in Dublin, albeit the team weren't as good for obvious reasons. But that's the thing, can they muster up? But as I said, 19 of their starting 23 against Australia, when they rattled up some serious quality scores against Australia, and it looked like they just fell asleep for the last 30 minutes and conceded some appalling scores. They really should have won 3 games in the championship, and they had 2 very respectable results against New Zealand, if you like. So this side are, like, for all the change, this side can play rugby. They can really play. And I think that's why the Irish second row, back row selection is so important, to be able to nullify the stuff before it becomes a problem, is what I think Joe Smith will try and do. And in that case, I think Ireland will win. But I think we should really respect this side. They're a bloody good team to watch, if nothing else, as well. So I think one eye is on New Zealand, but this is a potential one where I think it'll be tighter than 17.
And let's not forget there's no Conor Murray, who's been ruled out of this for a while, so we've kind of almost become used to it. But he's such an important player, and Marmion has really only started one big game for Ireland, presuming it's him that's in there. So that's a big thing. And given that Conor Murray, according to Instagram, has gone on his holidays to Dubai, he's probably not going to be around next week either. So this is it's almost a given.
Right.
We've almost taken it. We've almost forgotten that Murray isn't there. It's only when we see Kieran Marmion alongside Sexton, they've got a really good back three. If his box kicking is a little bit off, Ireland will be in trouble. So there are dangers there for Ireland.
Okay, yeah, fair point. So Murray's off in...
So I believe, yeah. He won it World Player of the Year in Paris for Midi Olympique on Monday or Tuesday, and then he's off to Dubai for a couple of days. So,
but then he's going to come back tanned and well rested, right? Ready to go for New Zealand?
Who knows?
We are here with Air Sport, the home of rugby in Ireland. Do get your comments in if you're watching or listening. The Heineken Star comment is running, and this week we've signed rugby ball and some off-the-ball Heineken branded goodies, so you can get those questions in. I'll put them to Liam in a second. I do want to touch on England-New Zealand then, which is at 3 o'clock at Twickenham. And it's been a while, I think it's 4 years since we've had New Zealand at Twickenham. The interesting team news, Liam, is that Manu Tuilagi looks like he's going to start. And Eddie Jones at several points has been wistful about Manu Tuilagi's performance in 2012 in that 38-12 win. Is Tuilagi someone who could really transform what England are about over the next year if, and I appreciate how sizable and if it is, if he got back to his best and stayed healthy?
Just a question, is he potentially starting at 12 or 13? Or do we know?
We don't know. Is that a big difference?
I think so. I think it makes a big difference because obviously the other player, then it depends how they dovetail and stuff. I think what he can actually bring to the game is certainly he might carry the ball 10, 12 times.
Yeah.
And if you may tackle him and put him down and stop him 8, 9, 10 times, but all he needs to do is make one break. And if you don't quite meet him perfect, get that perfect hit on him, it's almost certain a try will be scored because he will break the gain line and then a whole series of things. So I think that's one of the things he can bring is that sense of physicality.
Yeah.
And it won't work every single time, but all it needs to do is work once or twice in a match, and you're most likely going to score a 7-pointer if he does make that half break. It seems a little bit weird, though, this close to the World Cup, to be trying to reinvent the whole wheel and to try and recover from the loss of the Vinipola brothers, etc. He seems to be, Eddie Jones that is, seems to be really unsure about his back row for obvious reasons, unsure about an awful lot of his set, whereas in our case, we're arguing about a very, very settled group of players and who gets left out. We're pretty comfortable with our style of game, etc. So I think someone like him coming in would be a huge handful. Yeah. But then who's the best players around him? You know, obviously Farrell is now playing at 10, so is it Slade outside him, or if he plays 12 or 13, etc.
And where would you like to see him? I mean, do you think the 4 to 10 day has come and gone now then, based on just the last day?
I think so. I think Farrell he's one of the leading players, but he's not just as a rugby player, as a leader. And looking back at that tackle, I think personally that should have been a penalty and it should have been a yellow card. He rode his luck in a sense, but what he did do is he showed the fighting spirit of an English rugby player right to the very, very end. So he's a hugely important player.
Yeah. Eddie Jones was talking about there's a dossier. So the Lions obviously beat New Zealand and quite a number of English players involved. So he's been sitting down with all them to go through the notes, and they've had a meeting with the senior players. Lions put a lot of pressure on the All Blacks in areas they didn't enjoy. But, you know, so we talked about this dossier, but then rounded off by saying there's no magic formula either, though. It's not like Pythagoras' theorem. You've just got to be in the game and play well. And he made some interesting points about how New Zealand have improved, he feels, in the last number of years. So he had 5 wins from 11 against them as Australia boss between 01 and 05, which is very decent, you would think. But he said, when we were successful with the Wallabies, we could beat them because we could get to their set piece, especially their line-out. Since 2011, their line-out has gone from being good to being outstanding. So has their scrum, and so has the depth of their players. And they're the 3 areas that they've improved in the most, was Jones's assessment of New Zealand.
That's fair. I mean, there's no like this dossier won't be that thick. The Lions just did, ran a very basic game plan very well.
I suspect the English version of Ruaidhri O'Connor was leading Eddie Jones in the same way that you led Greg Feek with that question.
Quite possibly. Looking for a line, anything for a cheap line. No, the Lions proved that if you play well against New Zealand, you can beat them. Ireland proved that as well. It's keep playing against them, get your basics right, and bring line speed. I think line speed is the key, and maybe the Lions and Ireland beating them in 2016 and 2017 has opened their eyes to that a little bit, that they are vulnerable. But I think, I've said it before in here, I think the next 2 weeks will prove how good this New Zealand team are. I don't think they're as good as the one that played 4 years ago, a year out from the World Cup. I think they've lost leaders. I think they're too used to winning. I think they're almost complacent. We saw that in South Africa end game when they wouldn't take the drop goal. They're still the best team in the world, but I think they're vulnerable, and I think England will rattle them, and I think Ireland can beat them. So there's he doesn't need a dossier. He just needs his team to go out there and play well, because they're still a very good team, full of team players who will believe that they can beat them because they've done it already. Tuilagi, you only have to go back to Brian O'Driscoll and the way he speaks about him whenever he's mentioned in here. Brian O'Driscoll rates him so highly. That's the endorsement only endorsement you need. Slade's a really good player. Farrell's a winner. The scrum is always good. Joe Moody's out. He ruptured an eyelid, which is pretty gross, in training yesterday. So he's a really important player for the All Blacks, whose depth is good, but there's certain positions where you don't want to lose players, and your loose head is one of them. So I think it's going to be an unbelievable game. It's the game of the month, and a bit of added intrigue. The New Zealand Herald had a go. Veiled, it's always the medium of choice from the All Blacks coaches. They had a go. Brad Shields, the Kiwi, is playing at blindside today, so that should get him going. I'm sure Bunyak, he'll be made aware of it as well before next week. So there's a lot at stake. This game has been built up, and it probably, if it had happened a year ago, it would have been even bigger. But it's still going to be the game of the window, I think, apart from our game next week.
Liam, do you share Rory's point there about New Zealand? That's very interesting.
Yeah, I'm just for like if you look at when New Zealand were vulnerable, in other cases during the championship, it seemed when they put themselves into that vulnerability, when they became a little loose. And I think the championship allows that. If you look at the stats from Argentina, like even though they're losing games, they're equal to Ireland's stats in many, many ways, and Ireland are winning games. So the championship allows a little loosener. I'd be interested to see, will New Zealand come to the Northern Hemisphere and adapt to their game, or force England to adapt the New Zealand game? I fancy that they'll try and transition towards the Six Nations. I can't imagine they'll ignore a drop kick like Rory was mentioning there, which was just unbelievable. How he couldn't. I for some reason I think that they will tighten their game appropriately, and I think we might see a slightly different New Zealand with slightly different skill sets on show. And of course, a little like Leinster, they're one of the few sides that can adapt as drastically. So for me, I think that's what they might do, which might make it that bit more difficult for England, because England won't have the same opportunities as a result.
Okay. And where are England? I mean, there were some strange things going on in the Six Nations. I mean, not least you think up in Edinburgh when they put one man in the breakdown. This was Eddie Jones's next big frontier in rugby, and it was completely exposed. So, like, as Jones it's going to be interesting. It's a big month for him as well. So, where are England?
Well, if you're asking where England, and you look at their club sides, and you look at the first round of Europe, and you say, wow, where are England now?
Yeah.
When you think that their best teams were really, really, really struggling. And we've been through it so many times in the show, all the reasons. They have a smaller squad size in their clubs. They have to play more minutes than any other side, particularly in an Irish context. All of that feeds into a negative when it comes to the amount of opportunity the English management have. So I still think they're a ways off behind Ireland. I don't know if you rated them in a Six Nations, but certainly Ireland are a long way ahead of them in how Ireland play the game, how they can impose themselves in the opposition than England are. And the types of injuries that England have really rattled their game plan. Like when you take Vinopola, the number 8 out, it just completely transformed how England can't play. Whereas if you take any of the Irish back row, you can only pick 2 or 3 back rows, and it won't necessarily change the style of the game.
Okay. Any last word on any of the other games that you're keeping a close eye on over the weekend?
Wales, Australia would be good, and I think Italy, Georgia is one to keep an eye on, given the Georgians aren't allowed into the elite, and Italy looked so poor last week. So I think maybe that's why I think they had an eye on that one, because they got to keep the Georgians down.
They could do with not losing at home to Georgia. Okay. Rory O'Connor from the Irish Independent, thank you. Liam, pleasure, thanks a million.
Thanks, Joe.
Wednesday night rugby on Off the Ball
with Air Sport. Watch live Pro 14 action on Air Sport this season. Visit airsport.ie.
Upgrade your home to a Ferco home and experience the highest level of styling, craftsmanship and security.
I'm Jim Toll from Ferco Windows and Doors. Our handmade lifestyle range has no weak points, are independently certified as impossible to break into, and come with energy-saving EcoGlass as standard. See ferco.ie.
It all looks better through a Ferco window.
Football Index is reinventing football betting. You can buy and sell the world's top players. Their value may go up and down, but it's not over with the final whistle like a regular bet. Football Index, reinventing football betting.
Start building your portfolio today at footballindex.co.uk or download the app now. New customers only, minimum deposit and conditions apply. Gamble responsibly.
At Blackrock Clinic, we offer direct access to our expert team of endoscopy specialists. So if you're concerned about a stomach or bowel issue, we can quickly find the cause and whether it's serious or not. With a referral from your GP, an appointment can be arranged within 24 hours. For access to a world-class endoscopy unit, think first. Think Blackrock Clinic. Blackrock Clinic, when your experience needs ours.
Are you living with gout or have a loved one who is? Gout is the most common form of inflammatory arthritis affecting up to 1 in 40 adults. Arthritis Ireland is holding a series of information evenings about gout in Cork, Castlebar and Dublin on the 6th, 7th and 8th of November. Each talk will be delivered by a consultant rheumatologist. Book your place today at arthritisigreland.ie/living with gout and learn a lot more about this painful condition. Supported by A. Minarini Pharmaceuticals.
Welcome to the Ford Innovate 191 sales event, driving better value for you. Take the all-new Ford Focus ST line, featuring Ford Sync with touchscreen, smartphone mirroring, ST line design kit and cruise control. And right now, you can order a 191 Ford Focus with an amazing 7-year warranty, 7-year roadside assistance and 2 years free servicing, all from just $23,400